Welcome in, Technique Academy members. Yes. Getting close to the seasonal tournament. Last call, we talked about meta, how to analyze a meta, and break down the stats. Very long call last time. We're going to have a little short one this week. I want to delve into the Targon mid-range decks that have become more popular recently. We saw when Targon first came out, there was a plethora of Mountain Scryer decks, but they've been largely suppressed by Feel the Rush, over the top um, strategies, as well as even Lee Sin, Zed in its heyday also suppressed this value oriented deck. But I just want to talk about the premise of the deck, some variations, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, what each card's purpose is, as well as possible other cards you can play, and some misplays that you can do to how to avoid some misplays when you're playing this deck as well that I've found out. So maybe I can save you some headache or some misplays or some LP in the meantime. But yeah, starting with the day and night version. Day and night being Diana Leona. The Diana Leona. Now, Diana as a champion in this deck, you don't have that much Nightfall. It's pretty much just Diana, Pale Cascade. There's some versions that do splash Unspeakable Horror. You could also play the 2/3 Elusive as a Nightfall card as well. If you wanted more value, you could play Lunari Priestess, I guess. But those cards don't contribute too much to the board. And to me, Diana is just kind of a card in this deck that is there to challenge aggro a little bit. It can come down and challenge a fearsome unit. I was finding it quite good against fearsome, just being able to challenge a fearsome unit and then continually attack into most of the X2 fearsome threats. It's not that great of a card. I don't think it's a necessity for this deck. I feel like the Leona curve is already pretty good for the deck against most aggressive strategies. But it's here, and with it you get Lunari Dustbringer. The Dustbringer is nice because if you're playing on the evens against an aggressive deck, you can Dustbringer on turn 1, get the pedal, and then you can come with Diana on 2. Maybe even open pass with Dustbringer, because you're fine playing a later game, and that might discourage your opponent from developing. I've definitely had games there, and it's fine, because if they don't develop, you don't develop your Diana, no big deal. Bank the mana, you'll use it for some spell later for sure. And, if they don't develop it now, they're going to develop it later. It's going to get caught by the Diana one way or another. So, works just fine, I think. But the bigger part of the Lunari Dustbringer that I like, the Dust Petal Dust, is you can use it with the Eclipse Dragon. And Eclipse Dragon, this is pretty much the reason why these decks have gotten so much more popular in recent times, is this buff. The last patch, you got 7 toughness. That is hard to deal with. Even on turn 7, a 7/7 is going to need a hard removal. There's not going to be much that can trade with an Eclipse Dragon on that turn. Big blocker, big fearsome blocker, has Fury, and that's before you even get into the Daybreak Nightfall. So this is a day and night deck. So you have Daybreak and you have Nightfall. The Nightfall is generally the better ability. This isn't an Aurelion Soul deck. We will get to those later, where the Daybreak will play a little bit more of a factor. But the Nightfall create a random Dragon Follower and a Celestial Follower in hand. This is big, because the Mountain Scryer is going to make the Celestial cheaper. If you have Revon, you get both. If you hit the Nightfall on it, it'll still be Always Sunny. I like to call this Always Sunny Revon. So you can, one of the best mid-range things you can do here is come with Revon on 5, and then on 6 you could pedal out your Eclipse Dragon, because then you'll pick up 2 units that are going to be cheaper, as well as one being a Celestial, one being a Dragon. That's going to come into play later on when we start talking about Skies Ascend. But if we just go down the list here, the early game, you got the Dustbringer to trade, you got Solari Soldier, of course, and a Shield Bearer. You got the whole curve right here of the Leona stuff. Spacey Sketcher is a card that I don't really like that much. I can see maybe trimming down on him, and you'll see other versions of the deck that don't really play it as much. It does give you a couple good things, like Equinox sometimes is clutch at removing Leviathan, or maybe even River Shaper, just like to where they can't get snowballed by one of those effects. Outside of that, the body never feels good. And this deck does fill the board decently well, so it maintains the board pretty well too with the Targon protection. So like the extra 1/1 laying around always feels kind of dumb to me. So it's really about the power of the cards that you get, and I guess that depends on the meta. I mean, one good thing about the Spacey Sketcher you can do is if you get the Moon Silver, whatever the coin is, you can use that to get an early Eclipse Dragon, possibly even turn 5 if you have like Sketcher. You could also get rid of the Dust Petal Dusk and turn it into a card with the Sketcher, so it's kind of, you know, a +1 there. But getting a cheap Elusive is not bad. Serpent's good to regain tempo, things like that. Get the free 2/1 with a Diana turn. You could really regain tempo against an aggro deck. That's probably where it's best. But I don't think you really need all 3 of these. A Hush, that's just kind of playing a mono Targon deck. You don't have many options for removal outside of your invokes. So Hush is kind of playing that part where you can have some burst speed interaction. Pale Cascade, just a great card. Going to be in most all Targon decks for the foreseeable future, I think. Solari Shield, also Nightfall to level up the Diana, which is something you're not going to do too much. You do have the Eclipse Dragon. This isn't really a Diana deck. It's, you know, a Mountain Scryer deck more than anything. It's about maintaining the board early enough to where you can just start snowballing with your Mountain Scryer and those effects. There is the Leona Daybreak kills that you can get with Morning Light. That's something else you can do. But generally, you're just trying to get to the Star Shaping and like a cheap big Celestial or a big Eclipse Dragon, soften them up. Yeah, still going down the list. Shield Bear needs no explanation. Solari Priestess. Solari Priestess. The most important thing about Solari Priestess, and I think what can hold you back in playing this deck, is understanding your opponent's deck. Because you need to know and you need to plan it out ahead of time. Because every effect or card you're going to get from invoking is going to be a slow speed effect, whether it be a unit or whether it be a spell. They're all slow, pretty much. So this knowing what to do with your Solari Priestess is pretty important, because you see the same range. Same thing with the Star Shaping. You see the same range of stuff often because it's cut down to just 3 mana cost. Same thing with the Star Shaping. It's 7 or more, so it's actually 7, 8, 9, and 10. So it's a little wider array out of the Star Shaping as opposed to the Solari Priestess. But you're going to immediately play this. These spells you're going to play probably shortly. So knowing if you need to find the Obliterate, do you have time for that? Should it be, do they have interaction if you're coming with a Meteor to do 4 and 1 on the damage? Should you get Golden Sisters? Are you going to have board space for that? Some matchups are warrior matchups, and shoot, I could do a whole call on, you know, the whole meta on breaking down what Solari Priestess wants to get in each particular matchup. But you do have to gauge the situation, because sometimes you come down with the Priestess and you're really far ahead. So you maybe want to pile that on with something like a warrior, where normally you would want to get an Obliterate for the Leviathan or something, but maybe it's right to pile on. But it really depends on what your hand is as well. But for the most part, you're looking for the best interaction for what your opponent has. So knowing the meta and how decks operate is going to be pretty crucial to play a deck like this with all the invokes. Not only Solari Priestess, but also the Mountain Scryer. Thinking about the situation, it's almost like drafting your deck while you're playing it, which is an interesting way to go. Like if you think about like maybe like playing a limited format for a different game, like playing a draft or expedition or something, you're adding this card to your hand. It's effectively adding it to your deck in a way. So like it's a different kind of skill that you might not be used to doing, because you might just be used to playing your deck. Well, this deck, you're gonna have to open your perspective here as to, you know, assessing the game, where it's going, what your opponent has or could have possibly have, because we're not going to have open deck list either for the seasonal or when you play on ladder. So Very important. Go back and look at it. Hey, well, these were my 3 options. Maybe in playtesting, write down the 3 options whenever you play against somebody, or if you're just playing the games on the ladder, and then be like, well, would have one of these other things been better in this matchup, in this game, because we ended up doing X, Y, Z. It's always good to reflect like that, and you have Mountain Scar, Solari Priestess both doing that same effect. Revoon's going to give you a random Daybreak card. This could be a whole host of things. So if you look at the range of this, it's like Zenith Blade's probably the worst. You get some Overwhelm, which isn't terrible. You can pick up Solari Soldier, Shield Bearer, that's all fine. Solari Priestess to keep a chain going of value, because then the Priestess could find something else. Another big thing for the Solari Priestess, if you aren't certain what you want in one, it's kind of safe to pick the Traveler, because it'll give you a redraw whenever you play the Traveler, and it's a decent 3/4 body. It's also Celestial. This is important whenever we talk about Sky's Descent, because this is a card that you're going to play in this deck and actually cast, and you're going to need to at least have 1 Celestial or Dragon in play to be able to play this at 13 mana. But I've played it as cheap as 3 mana. It's a good card. It's a one-sided board wipe. We're going to get to that in a second. But this Solari Priestess is a good hit. The Morning Light's nice, especially if you have Leona, because Leona Morning Light's nasty. Also, keep in mind that if you do get a Morning Light off of Ravone, sometimes you're going to want to like not let your Priestess die. Don't give it up in a trade or something like that. Maybe you'll trade off something else to keep this if a Morning Light turn is incoming, because that'll give you more value. Again, you have to gauge value versus tempo, because if you give up too much tempo, all the cards in your hand aren't going to be able to save you. So maintaining board position and picking up these card advantage, and the deck just outvalues everything. It really does. So it's all about not dying so you have time to play the value, which this deck can do well too, because it's got a Leona kit. It's a lot of stuns. It's hard to develop into this deck. It's got some late game threats as well. It's got some healing and star shaping. So it's like also hard to just, get down on this deck as well. Like, it's hard to open. It's hard to develop. It's a really strong deck. Zenith Blade, not that good. Morning Light, we talked about it. Sun Guardian's fine, but not that good. Sunburst, I seem to never get this one off of Ravone. But yeah, Sunburst is a card. You could play Sunburst in a deck, potentially, if you wanted some hard removal. I don't think it's necessary, though. I think you want to actually just play your units out and have that be the way. That could change. I don't know what meta would want you to have to play 2 Sunburst in your deck, or a Sunburst or 2. It is a nice clean kill in the mirror for like Leona, but not for a lot of things though. There's spell shields and whatnot. And it takes a good portion. 6 mana, you're never going to be able to really trade up on this, is the problem. You're never going to be able to like trade up with the Sunburst. Like, you're not removing anything that costs 7 or more most of the time. So, the best and probably the biggest high roll is going to be the Eclipse Dragon, especially if you already have a pedal out of the Luminari Dustbringer, because the Ravone's going to go right into the Eclipse Dragon. So look for that line, because that's when you start to snowball your opponent. It's at very least a very big sizable board that you can create on the tall end right here. And again, you're going pretty wide early. A lot of these units are cheap, and they stick to the board to slow the game down when they come into play, so they're sticking around usually. Yeah, hit this and this. Don't forget that this Daybreak effect is, don't miss out on the Daybreak on the Leona. Like, if you have a level Leona and multiple Eclipse Dragons, don't be scared to just play an Eclipse Dragon and get the stun off the Leona, or use it to level up Leona, because you'll have, if you have another Dragon in hand, the next Eclipse Dragon is going to be cheaper. So, or Celestial. We'll get to that in a second, though. We talked about Ravone, Star Shaping. So Star Shaping, yeah, heal 5, get the big Invoke. And I guess we could take a look at the Invokes, right? So, Celestials. We just look at all the Celestials here. So when we're looking at top, 7 or more. Cosmic Inspiration is, I don't know, probably one of the most desired ones to get, pumping everything. Think about all your Spacey Sketchers and stuff just being huge. 1 mana 3/3s. It's a good way to recoup a board. Like, if you're kind of even on the board, Cosmic Inspiration is going to be amazing. If you're not, and you have a turn to maybe fire it off, and you have some cheap follow-ups, then it's going to be really nice. It's also really good to get this thing going. It makes your Diana a lot better too. to become a good threat. But I mean, overall, I mean, this is just one of the better ones you can get right here at 7. The Destroyer's fine. All of them are really good except for, I think, Cosmic Rays needs a very specific situation for it to work. Don't forget that the spells, you have to behold, behold, behold. If you behold, if you behold. So, knowing that, you might want to save, like if you sketched out a Celestial and you think that they can remove it, then maybe you shouldn't play it before you cast one of these things. Or if you have like a spell, say you picked up a spell earlier, like a meteor or a comet, right? Meteor shower or a comet or written in the stars. Maybe you want to fire off that cosmic inspiration you picked up off that star shaping, or I mean, you could pick these cards up off of Mountain Scryer as well, or the Traveler, which is the other 4-drop I was telling you about earlier. So no matter what, you want to make sure that you have the condition for these. Don't forget, this is also important, that it says if you behold. If your opponent's been paying attention, they'll know how many Celestials you've hit already, right? And so, say you only invoked once, and you got a Trickster or something off of a Species Catcher, and it's in play, and then now you're getting this Cosmic Inspiration. So then you play the Cosmic Inspiration, right? And they already know the only other Celestial that's shown up this game is the Trickster. They can remove the Trickster before the Cosmic Inspiration goes off, and then it'll completely counter it. So be careful with that, with these effects. The if you beholds. Watch out, because there's a continued, there's a requirement to actually having them resolve. You just throw them away. You don't want that. So next up, Eclipse Dragon. Yeah, this is the buff. This is the reason I play this stuff. 7/7 Fury is huge, even bigger on turn 6. Just comes down, it's going to muscle whatever's on the board for the most part. And then, like, you could usually attack with it. It's got Fury as well. Pretty strong. You can pick up any Dragon or Celestial unit. So you get any old kind of Celestial, too. It could be Serpent, Charger, Trickster, Messenger. I mean, they're all great. Warrior, Golden Sisters, Destroyer, the big stuff. Yeah, so always going to be great. If you get the Daybreak with it, too. Do note, though, because I did this one time the other day, if you have Revon out, you get both. I was saying that earlier about the Daybreak and the Nightfall. But be careful, because you'll look at your hand, and I was like, okay, I had a Great Beyond, and the Great Beyond had a Mountain Scryer out, so this Great Beyond's only 6 mana. But I wanted to play a Charger I had in my hand, because I wanted to set up for a Sky's Descent on the next turn. And I should have played the 6 mana Great Beyond first, and then played the Charger, because I had to overwrite a unit. Because that tends to happen. You jam the board pretty hard, that your little straggling units, like, Lunari Dustbringer, Species Catcher, things like that, even Diana, are just kind of hanging around while you got, the thickness of a Dragon and a Revon out, or a Leona, and so you just have these thick units kind of stopping combat from your opponent. And so the rest of the stuff never gets into combat unless you attack with it. So you got to be careful with board space. But I went to go overwrite the Charger so I could have a Celestial. I was overwriting Diana with the Charger, and I did that, and then I didn't realize that this Charger, which was already 0 mana, got played and it ate my Eclipse Dragon buff. Because I didn't realize that this also reduces the cost of the next Celestial unit as well. So bear that in mind. You can Eclipse Dragon to get, one of these. Say you could even Star Shaping early and then Eclipse Dragon on 6 or 7 to, get a cheap Scourge on 8. That's not bad either. You can line something like that up and make for some nasty, overpowered turns. But yeah, this is like a Haymaker deck for sure. And the biggest Haymaker at the end of it all is Sky's Descent. Again, it costs 2 less for each Dragon or Celestial ally you have. So on a full board of Celestials or Dragons, it's going to be 3 mana. Average cost probably about 9 mana. But you do have to manage that. Don't throw away your units if you're in a matchup that's going to require Sky's Descent. Another important thing about Sky's Descent is that it's a great counter to one of the better cards against a mid-range deck like this. And by that I mean the Harrowing. A big Harrowing could be scary because this deck, this is like the only board wipe. You could play things like Judgment or whatever, but those are just way more conditional. And this just is costly, but not conditional. So, I mean, the condition is you have to have at least one dragon or celestial to be able to cast it. But in a late game, if your opponent's reliant on a harrowing, also in the mirrors, it's pretty good too, being able to wipe the whole board, especially if the board gets clunked up and there's not a lot of trades happening. You can wipe them out. If they have their Ravon, Leona set up, then you can blow them out with the Sky's Descent, knock them off, clear the whole board. Pretty big stuff right there. Yeah, but that's this version right here, and I've been liking this. There are some changes that I can see being made, like maybe you cut a Spacey Sketcher, get you another Hush in here. You play Guiding Touch, that's not the worst. It's a pretty good one to actually go with Nightfall, just being able to maybe trigger an Eclipse Dragon easy, than having to commit something weird. It also turns on Pale Cascade if you're like being defensive and you need a Pale Cascade on an open attack or something, and you don't want to miss out on the extra draw. That's fine. More heals are also good, like mild heals like that, like a Guiding Touch, probably going to be better. You can Guiding Touch than a Pale Cascade in a lot of positions because it also replaces itself. But if you have like a Damage Ravon or a Leona, getting that heal off on them could like save it from a flock, could save it from a lot of things. A challenger or something can actually make a block heal and keep your thing. So, and it can heal face, which can prolong the game and get you to the time to be able to use all this value that you're trying to use. So, overall, I'm a big proponent of the Guiding Touch, and I'd probably add a couple to the deck. If not the full set, some amount maybe. Yeah, but so that's his version of the deck. I do want to bring up this too. This is a day and night version here that splashes Demacia. It does play Leona and Diana, but it cuts all the Sketchers, puts in single combat. Here's the Guiding Touches I was telling you about. It still makes use of the Dustbringer to go with not only Diana, but the Eclipse Dragon. Cuts down to one Sky's Descent. You get more removal with single combat here. So, you don't want to have too much removal because there's a good chance that you're going to be getting removal off of the Priestess and the Scryer. That's probably the big difference between this deck and that deck. You lose one of these big top-end things, but you get a more accessible removal spell in the early game because some units just need to be removed early. And this single combat is just one of the better cards and probably the only reason to play Demacia half the time, and pairs really well with the Leona kit. Like Shield Bearer comes down as a 3/6. They don't want to attack. Okay, you don't want to attack? Single combat. Great. Single combat also works with Solari Soldier in a similar way. And just being able to trade. And you also have big units like Eclipse Dragon and Ravon that can eat something single combat style and be fine. And then the Guiding Touch looks even better in this situation because you can single combat and then Guiding Touch to heal your thing back up. That's a possibility as well. Single combat's nice. Yeah, that's like the biggest thing. You do give yourself a chance to potentially miss with your Mountain Scryer, but it's only a 3-card chance. So that's really not that high. You're pretty much going to hit it most all the time. And, I mean, its effect is just as effective as the Invoke as well. If you think about it, all your Celestial cards cost one less. You have a lot of things that still produce Celestial, like Star Shaping. You have Star Shaping and Eclipse Dragon. They both, and Priestess. So, the cost reduction is still going to be good on this. Not the best body for that time, but, the game slows down a pretty good bit. And when it does, you're going to take over with the cost reduction. But yeah, just adding single combat to this deck, basically. From the same one before. You see +1 Sky's Descent, all the Hushes are gone. You get single combat or the Hush. That's the key difference. So that would be a meta call, really. I think the Hush is fine. You could very easily just play the Hushes, but you wouldn't get the touches. But I like the touches too. And I like the touch for just making the game go longer. More heals. Keep your units alive. Seems fine. It's also a very proactive play, and as a heal, it's great with Eclipse Dragon because if you're like, all right, Guiding Touch, Eclipse Dragon, great. You're not going to miss the Nightfall if you have something like that. Where if you look back on the other list, it's like, well, you're going to Hush something and play the Dragon, or you're going to. I mean, the Dragons could get weird if you don't have the pedal. Is the issue. I mean, it does get a little mitigated by playing. Now, you do lose out on a 1-drop in the form of Sketcher, which you know, sketch is nice with Diana too. I've even sketched away Diana in some matches when the Diana wasn't looking that good. But, you know, having another 1-drop to go with the Diana is probably not that bad either. But maybe there's a happy medium here. But I really have been liking single combat in this deck. And if you do put single combat in this deck, just remember that that region combination is locked out. So that means you can't play something like Shyvana Midrange. This is a greedy deck. I actually got this deck from BBG, and he was telling me that the thing about this deck, and I've played some games with this deck. I picked up like 50 LP with it the other day, yesterday, and he was telling me that this deck was beating everything that wasn't aggro. It was beating everything that wasn't aggro, and I can see why. Like, it's a Shyvana A-Soul deck, so you have A-Soul up top. Also, I do want to note that if you don't want to play Diana in the other deck, you want to make it more mid-range, you could play Aurelion Sol in that deck. And that would be fine too. It would just give you that locked-in late game. You'd have to cut Sky's Descend as well, because you'll have A-Soul, Sky's Descend. So let me just pull that list back up so you can see what I'm talking about. Like if you want to do it like this. Just single combat version here. Oh, this is it right here. Yeah, with Aurelion Sol. So Leona, Aurelion Sol, you still got the Eclipse Dragon, still have Starshaven, Ravoon, Mountain Scryer, you got the whole kit here, the single combat 2, Pale Cascade, Hush, and Guiding Touch with Sketcher and Solari Priestess. So you do lose out on the Diana, but that's not that big of a deal in a lot of matchups, honestly. Diana just makes you a little better against aggro, I think. And like having A-Souls, a big plus in some of the control matches. It can get scary for people with Aurelion Sol. Also, Aurelion Sol is kind of naturally awesome behind Eclipse Dragon already. So if you like Eclipse Dragon, that's fine. You Eclipse Dragon, and then you can Aurelion Sol and cheat. But here's the thing about this deck, is since you're not playing the Diana kit, you don't have the other 1-drop. The 2-1. The Petal Maker. The Dustbringer. And so that means you're never going to get a cheap Eclipse Dragon. Unless you get it off the Sketcher coin, which is going to be pretty narrow with only 2 Spacey Sketchers. So just keep that in mind. I do like the other version to be able to get that turn 6 Eclipse Dragon. It's huge. You get both sides of it. I mean, Aurelion Sol, yeah, it's Aurelion Sol. I mean, a turn 8 A-Soul, sure, that's great. That's great. It's a great generator of value, and it's a big monster, but not super necessary, I don't think. Might be a breaker in the mirror, though, because Diana's not that good in the mirror. I mean, it does clean something out on the in-between, but the game always bogs down in the middle when the Leonas show up and stuff, and then you have the Leona morning light games going on, and maybe Aurelion Sol's a breaker in the mirror. I haven't played much of the mirror. When I did play it, the Sky's Descent main deck was pretty sweet because you didn't have to set up an A-Soul. So the mid game usually go like, I get a Dragon down before you do because I'm playing the Dustbringer, right? And then that means I can start piling on more bigger things. And then the boards kind of stay even because there's not a lot of removal like for these threats. And since there isn't that much removal for these threats, it bogs down, and then it's always coming to, you know, A-Soul plus, you know, A-Soul Sky's Descent. So A-Soul's great, you know, if the stuff's not getting removed. But the other version of the deck's just a little leaner, I think, and has an advantage in its leanness. Yeah, you can, if you're not pressing the issue, you're going to have to make sure you play it right. Because if you're not pressing the issue, say we're playing this version, you really need to press the issue in that late mid-game before the A-Soul shows up. And that's like setting up a Sky's Descent so that you can descend before the A-Soul or the turn that the A-Soul comes out. Don't forget that you can also pair it with Hush to clear out the A-Soul as well. So you can like Hush the A-Soul and then Sky's Descent them. And then make sure that you're closing the game in the next turn. So your board needs to be strong enough to actually close the game or get it close to where it's like within elusive range to where maybe you can finish them off with an elusive after a Star Shaping. Yeah. So yeah, getting back to this version here. That's the big difference between this deck and the other one. I think this is probably slotted in for control and for mirrors as opposed to Diana, which is just not as good. Because you just have a different end game, basically. Like the other deck, it's like Eclipse Dragon, and then you're going to play the stuff that you get off the dragon. And I think the dragon's enough by itself, honestly. Not its own body, but the two things it generates is just always going to be enough value, I think, to just close the game, even against a lot of removal. So the A-Soul seems like win more to me, personally. But I do get its appeal. I do get why people like it, though. So, I mean, I'm not going to knock it fully. And then finally, like I was saying about the Shyvana deck. So the one thing that Shyvana deck's got going for it, I never really played much Shyvana, but I did play it. This deck yesterday is Sharpsight's a great card. This is just a great card. It's like half of a Fury of the North, can block elusive. I mean, it's great. This is a Dragon Clutch deck. It's a lot of dragons. You got the Influence Fox. This is very aggressive. Pair that with Screeching Dragon. You get a lot of card advantage off of that. Not to mention the card advantage you get off of Eclipse Dragon as well. And A-Soul at the top. One of Sky's Ascent can be cast before A-Soul comes out because all the units are dragons pretty much. You even have the Egghead to get cheaper dragons as well. You have, of course, Pale Cascade because that's there. Brightsteel Protector is nice with not only the Dragon Guard Lieutenant, but also pairing that with Shyvana to make sure Shyvana has a lane to try and level. When the Shyvana gets leveled, it's really nasty, though, because it gets +2/+2 on its attack, and when it attacks, it gets a fight, which is big. A lot of fighting. A fight plus the heal, which is nice. Dragon's Clutch, I've played both sides of this card a lot, so that you're never going to run out of threats because you have Dragon's Clutch, you draw into dragons. You're always going to have action against control decks. If you're not picking up, and range decks, if you're not picking up card advantage off of Influence Fox, then you're getting it out of the Eclipse Dragon. If you're not doing that, then you're getting it off of Dragon's Clutch, which actually leads to one of these two, usually, or A-Soul. So plenty of value, plenty of value. As far as removal, it's like single combat. You have the Challenger, you have the fights with the Shyvana, you have Concerted Strike as well. So there's a little bit more removal in this deck, which gives you, and there's not the invoke factor. So basically, I mean, sometimes the invoke draws are great, and of course you can get some cheaper invokes if the Scryer doesn't get touched, which can really snowball as far as mana cost goes. But with this deck, it's going to be a known quantity because there's no invoke. I mean, there is the random Eclipse Dragon, and there is the A-Soul stuff at the top end, but we're talking about the top end. Most of the game's played before it gets to this point, so you'll already know, okay, well, we got single combat, we got challengers, that's going to be the points. You know, even Shyvana's spell gives something a challenge. Definitely done that to an Eclipse Dragon. So there's a lot of options there. Don't miss out. A couple things you don't want to miss out on is the Shyvana. I've seen dragons allies deal 12 plus damage. That's going to count all the strike damages as well. So if you're trying to kill something big, make sure you order your Concerted Strike with the smaller dragon instead of into the bigger one, and then that way both dragons will strike. That'll probably level up with Shyvana right there. Influence Vox. This is another card that you probably haven't seen played much, but when an ally with Fury kills an enemy for the first time each round, create a random dragon follower in hand. So Shyvana does not have Fury on the front side, but it is a dragon, so it can be drawn from Dragon's Clutch. It could be buffed from Dragon's Clutch. That's important. But it will not trigger the Influence Fox if it's not leveled up. You know, this works with fights as well. So if you fight with the single combat, like Vox into single combat's big. This stat line's solid with the 6 power. I mean, 6 toughness here. Pretty big. You do want to be careful, like, as greedy as it might look to go Vox into single combat in the same turn. If it's not super necessary, maybe it's better to save the single combat for the Eclipse Dragon if you're trying to get the Nightfall on it. Triggering the Nightfall in this Eclipse Dragon is a little harder to do than the other decks because there's not a bunch of 1-drops. There's a lot of 2-drops and stuff. So sometimes just playing it to make the A-Soul cheaper is fine. And I think we see that here as well as the other list that played A-Soul instead of Diana. So the other deck I'm just a little more focused on. The Diana version is a little bit more focused on getting the Eclipse Dragon and then turning the game from there. Getting it out as fast as possible and then closing the game with the Dragon. Which is a great place to be because, like I said, 7/7 is just hard to deal with. But yeah, I've been having success with all these lists on the ladder. I think there's a possibility that there could be a triple Targon lineup. I don't know what the last splash could be. Maybe, you know, like a Targon Allegiance you can do. There's something else you can do, I'm sure. You can do Targon with, Shyvana with the Demacia. You can do the Mono. You can do this with the Shadow Owls, right? I guess you couldn't do, you'd have to do the Shyvana with this one, right? Because this plays A-Soul. So that's like 2 decks right there. You do like the A-Soul Shyvana if you're liking that. If you expect the meta to be real mid-range heavy. And then you can play the mono Targon version. Or you could, do a light splash for something else. It's also possible. You do a light splash for you do this and just do a light splash for Unspeakable Horror if you want. But I don't know. I think they're in a good place right now. Some of the weaknesses, Ash Sejuani is tough. Freezing. I mean, I'm a big proponent of Zombie Ash as a tournament deck, and that's the type of deck that would probably prey on this deck big time. Ash plus Rhyme Fang seems terrible. Big Reckonings, Ash attacks plus, just freezing out the whole board and just pushing. Ash plus Glory Seeker. Those things are all going to be really good against these mid-range decks. And I think the deck might be coming back, honestly. The Ash Sejuani deck is getting a little more popular. I played the last couple gauntlets, and it seems like it's not really going anywhere. People are still playing that deck. I'm not going to say it's a hard counter to this deck because you still got a lot of play, but you lose a lot of stuff to Reckoning. You do. Along the way. Think about it. Even a level Leona, Mountain Scar, you're trying to set these little pieces. Ravon, that's just like as big as whatever their unit is. It's only as big. So, and then like can't even really try and trade. You get frozen out. Feel real bad. So, I've definitely won the matchup, but it doesn't feel great. That's I don't know, my take. I think this is a pretty good spot to be though, currently. But we're getting closer to the tournament. Going to be working harder on it next week. I've been doing some serious play testing and, stay updated on that. But with that, if you have any questions, anything like that, you can always hit me up on Discord. Make sure you add me. If let's talk about lineups. Let's talk about matchups in the Academy chat. I'm looking to see more in that conversation as well. But yeah, I think we're gonna actually not have a call on Thursday, being that it's American Thanksgiving. Sorry to all of our international Patreons, but I'm not gonna be available for that on Thursday. But I hope everybody's safe for the holidays, and I'll look forward to the next call with y'all. One love, everybody, and good vibes.